뭔가.
In 2019, a discovery was made in the Awash region of Ethiopia that challenged established ideas about human evolution. It was not a gold treasure or an ancient artifact. It was a skull, but not just any skull, a fossil whose anatomical features did not match any known hominid species that existed at that time. This skull, found in a well-dated geological layer, contains a paradoxical combination of primitive and advanced features. It calls into question the linear model of development, which assumes a sequential succession of species. Today, we will analyze this discovery, its characteristics, and how it could change the entire map of human evolution. Watch the video to the end to find out why this skull has forced anthropologists to rethink the timeline and geography of our ancestors' emergence. During this period, about 280,000 years ago, Africa was a mosaic of diverse landscapes, from wet forests to dry savannas, and each ecosystem supported its own hominid populations. The generally accepted theory of evolution tells us that, at this stage, Homo heidelbergensis, which had already spread across Europe and Asia, was gradually transforming into Neanderthals, while in Africa, the process of forming Homo sapiens was underway. However, the discovery of this skull calls such a linear model into question. Its age coincides with the period when, according to scientists, archaic Homo sapiens lived in Africa. But anatomically, they were still very different from us. The skull from Ethiopia, however, has features that, in theory, should have appeared much later. This temporary mismatch suggests that human evolution may not have been a straight line, but rather a dense and tangled bush, where many branches developed simultaneously, and we currently only know about a small portion of them. Additional analysis of the morphological features of the skull revealed even greater discrepancies with existing models. For example, the ratio of the length to the width of the skull, as well as the location and shape of the temporal bones, do not correspond to any of the hominid populations known to us from that time. This suggests that we are not dealing with a simple, archaic form of Homo sapiens, but with a completely separate, previously unknown branch of the human genus. And these are not just anatomical differences. This discovery may indicate that the cognitive abilities of this population developed in a completely different way than those of our direct ancestors. During the same period, according to paleoclimatic data, there were drastic climate changes, which could have contributed to the isolation of individual groups and, as a result, their separate evolution. Perhaps the Homo athanatos skull is evidence of such a process when a unique adaptive form arose in a changing environment. Its existence in the same time layer as representatives of the Acheulean culture also raises the question, was it the creator of this culture, or did it simply coexist with them? What species, in your opinion, could be the closest relative of this mysterious skull? Share your assumptions in the comments. The first analysis of the skull revealed its unique characteristics. The volume of the cranial cavity was 1,150 cubic centimeters, which is between the typical brain volume of Homo erectus, 801,000 cubic centimeters, and early Homo sapiens, 1,500 cubic centimeters. Even more remarkably, the brow ridge was extremely massive, which is an archaic feature characteristic of Homo erectus and Neanderthals. However, the occipital part of the skull had a distinct rounded thickening, known as globularity, which according to modern anthropological science is a key morphological feature of Homo sapiens. This combination of primitive and progressive features in a single fossil stumped scientists. An in-depth analysis of the skull revealed even more anatomical paradoxes. The temporal bones were thin and similar in shape to those of Homo sapiens, suggesting a more developed auditory system and possibly more complex vocal communications. At the same time, the jaw and teeth found nearby were surprisingly massive, which is characteristic of earlier hominids and indicates a diet that required considerable effort to chew. This suggests that this population may have occupied a unique ecological niche, combining the traits necessary for survival in harsh conditions with an anatomy that foreshadowed future cognitive development. New technologies have made it possible to perform a 3D reconstruction of the brain based on the inner surface of the skull. The results showed that the frontal lobes associated with planning and social behavior were more developed than in Homo erectus, but did not reach the size and complexity characteristic of Homo sapiens. This in turn indicates that we are probably not dealing with a simple anatomical hybrid, but with a creature whose thinking and social organization could have developed in a completely different, previously unknown scenario. It was on a unique, parallel path to complexity and possibly to intelligence. Therefore, when we look at this skull, we see not just a set of bones, but evidence of the incredible complexity of evolution. This makes us wonder why our branch survived and became dominant. After all, if this discovery is the key to understanding how our own thinking, our feelings, our fears, and our ability to ask questions came about, then what happened to this other, equally promising branch? Let's talk about it right now. Since dating ruled out the hypothesis of a later origin, and morphological analysis refuted its belonging to known species, scientists proposed the hypothesis of an unknown parallel line of development. Tentatively named Homo athanatos, this species could have existed simultaneously with the ancestors of Homo sapiens and Homo heidelbergensis. This model does not contradict the findings made in 2013 in South Africa, where the remains of Homo naledi were discovered. This species, which lived relatively recently, 335,000 years ago, also possessed a unique combination of primitive and advanced features, indicating the complexity and branching nature of the evolutionary process. In light of these data, the theory of the existence of Homo athanatos as a separate, previously unknown branch seems increasingly plausible. This finding calls into question the traditional view that human evolution followed a single, straight line. Now, it is more likely that we are talking about a complex, multi-vector process in which different species of hominids could coexist, compete, and possibly exchange genetic material, occupying unique ecological niches. If this species really existed, it could have been a kind of natural experiment in the development of intelligence and anatomy, different from the one that led to the emergence of modern humans. This discovery forces us to take a fresh look at the history of migration and settlement. Perhaps Homo athanatos was a local population isolated by climatic or geographical barriers, which allowed it to develop in isolation. This isolation could have been caused by drastic climate changes in the Middle Pleistocene, when cycles of glaciation and warming led to the expansion of deserts and the reduction of forest areas, creating islands for separate groups. Thus, the skull may be evidence of the existence of not one, but many cradles of humanity. The comparison with Homo naledi is particularly telling. Although Homo naledi were physically more primitive, they also lived at a time when early Homo sapiens already existed, indicating that archaic and advanced species may have overlapped in time. The discovery of Homo athanatos, if confirmed, will only reinforce this model, adding another completely unique branch to it, whose disappearance may have been linked to competition or environmental changes that proved fatal to it. The discovery of Homo athanatos in East Africa 280,000 years ago is of particular significance. According to current data, it was in this region and during this time period that Homo sapiens was formed. The oldest known remains of Homo sapiens from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco date back 315,000 years, and the remains from Homo kibish in Ethiopia date back 200,000 years. Our skull thus falls between these two important points, but its anatomy does not match either of them. This means that several parallel species may have coexisted in the cradle of humanity, each following its own evolutionary path. To fully understand the significance of this discovery, it is important to consider it in the context of paleoclimatic data. About 280,000 years ago, the Earth underwent massive climate changes known as marine isotope stage 8. During this time, glaciation increased dramatically, and vast areas of Africa became dry and inhospitable. These changes led to the fragmentation of hominid populations. They were forced to seek refuge in scattered, more humid oases. According to the theory of point evolution, such isolation is an ideal condition for the rapid and isolated development of species. Thus, the Homo athanatos skull may be evidence of just such a process. Perhaps its ancestors found themselves isolated in one of these oases in East Africa, allowing them to develop the unique anatomical features we now observe. This explains why the skull is unlike its contemporaries from other regions, or earlier or later hominids. It is the product of local adaptation and isolated evolution, which occurred in parallel with the formation of Homo sapiens. This hypothesis completely changes our understanding of the cradle of humanity. Instead of a single place where our species originated, we can now view Africa as an evolutionary incubator, where many hominid species competed, interbred, and evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. And only one of them ultimately gave rise to modern humanity. In this light, the Homo athanatos skull ceases to be merely an anomaly and becomes key evidence of a complex, multi-layered evolutionary process. Can a single find be so significant for the whole of science? And what other mysteries lie hidden in the depths of this story? Stay with us to find out the answers to these questions. Stone tools were found alongside the skull, which further complicated the picture. Their technological features were intermediate between the Acheulean culture, characterized by hand axes, and the Mousterian culture, which appeared much later and is associated with Neanderthals. This indicates that Homo athanatos may have possessed more sophisticated tool-making skills than its contemporaries, or may have adopted technologies from other species unknown to us. To better understand the mystery these artifacts hold, it is necessary to delve deeper into their details. The tools found were not simple flakes. They bore signs of the so-called Levallois technique, which was considered the hallmark of Mousterian culture and was associated with Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens. This technology required complex preliminary splitting of the stone and allowed for the creation of thinner and sharper tools. The fact that the tools found near Homo athanatos date back 280,000 years changes the timeline of the spread of this technology by tens of thousands of years. This discovery raises a fundamental question. Who actually invented this advanced technique? Was it the ancestors of Homo athanatos, who were ahead of other populations in their development? Or did they adopt it from other, as yet undiscovered species? It is entirely possible that the Levallois technique developed independently in different parts of Africa and Eurasia. If so, this indicates convergent evolution not only in anatomy, but also in technology, making the picture of human evolution even more complex and exciting. In addition, the remains of burnt bones were found in the layer, indicating the use of fire. The use of fire for cooking and heating was an important adaptation, but its control and application in camp life were signs of a high level of cognitive development. If Homo athanatos really possessed fire and advanced technologies such as the Levallois technique, then this suggests that it was not just an intermediate link, but a highly developed species with its own unique culture and set of skills. Another hypothesis put forward by scientists to explain the paradoxical anatomy of Homo athanatos is hybridization. It is known that our species, Homo sapiens, interbred with other, now extinct species, such as Neanderthals and Denisovans. Genetic studies show that many modern humans, especially Europeans and Asians, have between 2% and 4% Neanderthal genes in their DNA. And for people in Oceania and Southeast Asia, this percentage is supplemented by Denisovan genes. These facts suggest that ancient populations did not live in complete isolation, but came into contact with each other. However, the hypothesis of interbreeding between Homo erectus, or closely related archaic species, and populations with characteristics typical of Homo sapiens seems unlikely. After all, these species were separated by hundreds of thousands of years of evolution and significant anatomical differences. It is like imagining interbreeding between modern humans and, for example, Australopithecus. The anatomical and probably behavioral barriers would have been too great. Nevertheless, the presence of mixed features in the skull of Homo athanatos, an archaic brow ridge and a globular occipital bone, cannot be explained by mere chance or anomaly. This could have been the result of interaction between two very different, but not yet completely isolated populations. Perhaps Homo athanatos was a hybrid that arose from a rare but successful interbreeding. It could have been the fruit of love between representatives of Homo heidelbergensis and, say, early, not yet fully formed Homo sapiens. Such an event could have occurred in conditions where populations were forced to coexist in a limited area due to the climatic changes mentioned in the previous chapter. As a result, a new line appeared that was unlike either of its parents and inherited the most advantageous traits from both. This discovery may force us to reconsider not only the map of evolution, but also its mechanisms. Perhaps hybridization played a much more significant role in the formation of new species than we had assumed. Imagine that these hybrid populations did not die out but continued to evolve in parallel with our ancestors. Perhaps they would have developed their own unique cultural traditions, technologies, and path to the development of consciousness. This could have led to the emergence of not one, but two or even three intelligent hominid species on Earth. How would they have interacted with each other? Would it be competition, cooperation, or complete ignorance? Perhaps we would live in a world where humans are not the only intelligent species on the planet. It would be a completely different story. That is why the Homo athanatos skull is so important. It is not just a bone, but physical evidence of an incredible, almost fantastical possibility. It's as if someone studying the history of European settlements in North America suddenly found evidence of a fully fledged, developed civilization that coexisted with Native American tribes but remained unknown to us. Such a discovery would completely change our understanding of history. Skeptics, of course, point out that this is an isolated case. To confirm the hybridization hypothesis, new discoveries are needed to show that Homo athanatos was not just an anomaly, but part of a full-fledged, stable population. But even as the only evidence, it opens a window into a completely new, previously unknown world. It makes us wonder how alone we were in our evolution. What if this branch had survived and developed? How would it have changed the world? Let's talk about it right now. The discovery of the skull is prompting scientists to re-examine old museum collections. It is possible that among the tens of thousands of unexamined fossils, there are already relatives of Homo athanatos. It is quite likely that they were previously considered simply anomalous representatives of Homo heidelbergensis or other species, without paying attention to minor details that have now become extremely important. Prior to this discovery, there was similar confusion surrounding the remains of Homo naledi, found in South Africa in 2013. They also had a mixture of archaic and modern features, but lived much later, which only added to the confusion in our understanding. The discovery of Homo athanatos has set a precedent. Now, anthropologists around the world are re-examining collections that were long considered classified with due diligence. They are looking for those very anomalous skulls or bones that may have been misidentified. It's like a detective investigation, where one small clue can solve a long-standing, confusing case. Moreover, scientists can now use new technologies that were not available in the past. High-resolution computed tomography, CT, and 3D scanning allow fossils to be studied without damaging them and reveal the smallest details that would be invisible during a routine visual examination. For example, it is possible to reconstruct the shape of the brain with high accuracy from the inner surface of the skull, or to study bone thickness and tissue density. These methods, combined with advanced ancient DNA analysis, give us the tools to confirm or refute the hypothesis of Homo athanatos as a separate species. Perhaps this forgotten branch is not limited to a single find. It may turn out to be much more widespread than we thought. It could have developed in isolation, without competing directly with the ancestors of Homo sapiens, until climatic or other factors led to its extinction. Thus, the Homo athanatos skull is not just a unique fossil. It is a call to revise the entire existing classification system and to recognize that human history may have been much more multifaceted and complex than we imagine. The entire history of human evolution is a book with missing chapters. This skull is one of those chapters. It shows that there was much more diversity in Africa 250,000, 300,000 years ago than we thought. During this period, the ancestors of Homo sapiens presumably already existed on the continent, but their anatomy was not yet fully formed. Now we know that other, completely different species lived alongside them, and this changes everything. The discovery of Homo athanatos forces us to rethink the concept of linear evolution, which has long dominated anthropology. Instead of a single, sequentially evolving species, the picture becomes more like a tangled web, or, more accurately, a branching tree, where different hominids coexisted, evolved, and possibly interacted. This means that the emergence of Homo sapiens was not the inevitable triumph of a single species, but the result of a complex and chaotic process in which many candidates for the role of dominant intelligent being fought for survival. It is in this context that the skull from Ethiopia takes on special significance. It does not simply fill a gap, but creates a new one. It tells us that we must be prepared for new, completely unexpected discoveries that may force us to rewrite the textbooks. It reminds us how little we know about our own past. It is quite possible that somewhere deep underground lie the remains of other lost species that hold even more incredible stories. The most important question facing the scientific community right now is, where did these anatomical features, characteristic of later species, come from in a skull that lived 280,000 years before them? There are several hypotheses. Convergent evolution, when two species develop similar traits independently of each other. Hybridization, when Homo athanatos interbred with even more ancient but anatomically advanced species about which we know nothing. Or unknown mutations that led to the appearance of these traits earlier than expected. Each of these hypotheses has its strengths and weaknesses. Convergent evolution explains the emergence of similar traits in different, unrelated populations, which could have occurred in response to similar environmental challenges. For example, the development of a globular skull could have been an adaptive response to the need for more complex thinking, regardless of where and in which species it occurred. The hybridization hypothesis suggests that somewhere in Africa, there was another as yet undiscovered species that already possessed these traits. This species could have interbred with the ancestors of Homo athanatos, passing on its advanced genes. This, in turn, could mean that the evolutionary tree of humans is even more complicated than we could have imagined. Unknown mutations are the least likely, but not impossible, hypothesis. It suggests that Homo athanatos was a kind of evolutionary experiment that did not develop further. In any case, the Homo athanatos skull forces us to rethink the entire history of human evolution and accept that it may not have been as predictable and linear as we thought. The last mystery of this skull is not its past, but its future. It has become a kind of litmus test for science, which will either have to integrate it into its coherent theory or completely revise it. In any case, this discovery is one of the most significant in 21st century anthropology. The scientific community faces a difficult task to determine what exactly this discovery means for our understanding of our own history. If Homo athanatos is indeed a new species, then we will have to add another branch to the evolutionary tree, redrawing it and acknowledging that it was much more complicated than we thought. If it is the result of hybridization, then this means that interbreeding was not an exception, but perhaps an important factor in evolution that led to the emergence of completely new forms previously unknown to us. Regardless of which hypothesis proves to be correct, this skull is undeniable proof that human evolution was not a simple, linear process. It was a complex and chaotic interaction of many species that competed, coexisted, and perhaps even interbred with each other. It tells us that we may not have been the only intelligent beings on this planet, and this understanding, in turn, opens the door to a whole new era of anthropological research. Today's discovery is just one small but incredibly important piece of a puzzle that could completely change the way we see ourselves. This story's not over, and new discoveries may be made tomorrow. Perhaps somewhere in unexplored caves or under layers of earth, other skulls await us that will tell even more incredible stories. While we search for answers to these questions, please share in the comments what topics you would like to see in future videos on our channel. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next investigations.